Hello, and welcome back to Stories from the Ashes, where we pontificate on good books and the stories that define and refine us. I'm Amber, and I'm here with Amanda and artist extraordinaire Jamin Still, who's also an author. So thank you for being with us today, Jamin.
Yeah, you're welcome. Glad to be here.
Well, we try to start these conversations off by getting to know our guests a little bit, and the best way to do that is through your favorite books. So, what are 3 books that have been highly influential or are just in general your favorites?
Yeah, that's a great question. As I was thinking about it, I tried to pick some different types of books that affected me at different ages. So the first one is Chris Van Allsburg. He is, I'm sure you know, the kind of illustrator he is. I'm just holding this up. This is the Garden of Abdul Gasazi. His art is just so dreamy. He does a lot of graphite work, and it's really soft and it's really magical. And the story's okay. The story's okay, but it's the drawings that, as a kid, really drew me in.
Yeah.
And as I was thinking about the question, I think that ends up being a theme. How I feel when I either look at it or read it. The second one is The Silver Crown that I read as a kid. And I read this when I lived in England. My dad was military. And so I was in school over there. And I remember starting the book. And I think I was maybe 11 or 12. And there was just such mystery in reading and excitement. Again, there were elements of it that just really stuck in my memory. I never finished the book until a couple years ago. I ordered it to say, I wonder whatever happened with that girl with the crown.
Who's the author?
The author on that is Robert O'Brien.
Okay.
Robert C. O'Brien. And again, I bought it and I read it and I was like, no, that was okay. But man, as a kid, the memories that kind of lodged in my mind just from some of the imagery and some of, I think the cover of, which it wasn't this, it was an English version, just really stuck with me and shaped me. And then also Sherlock Holmes mysteries from when I was a kid, the feeling of Sherlock Holmes, Victorian London, kind of gritty.
Yeah.
There's something when you're a kid that is just really, it's kind of romantic in the traditional sense of the word, not the modern sense, that really stuck with me and still sticks with me when I think about writing, like creating setting, creating characters, stuff like that. So yeah, Sherlock Holmes, really influential on me as a kid too. So most of these were when I was a kid, but that's kind of influenced me on into adulthood as well.
Nice. In our Facebook group, one of the most repeated questions that we get is generally, my kid is this age, can they read Sherlock? And I think it's really funny because generally the response that everyone gives is, yeah, it's fine because it's usually like 11 and up. And it's like, it's fine. There's a lot of drug use, but it'll probably go over their head. And that's how it was for me.
Totally.
Like, I didn't really know what heating a spoon was representing. And so I was just like, oh, yeah, he's like, got some weird English British habits making tea or something over there. So, yeah. But I loved Sherlock Holmes as a kid, too. And my daughter really enjoys it as well. I love mysteries. I did a lot of Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to get my Agatha Christie's out of storage with this whole moving in process, because while we were displaced, I found one of those sets that's newer that has all the like brightly colored dust jackets for the spines. And it's so visually appealing. So I'm excited to get them unpacked so that my oldest can start jumping into those. I know she's really going to love Agatha. So you have the privilege of being an author and an illustrator. And first of all, do you have a preference?
Well, that's a loaded question, because I think there's a third category too, which only comes if you do both, which
Yeah.
is, I don't even know the label for it. It's just painter, because
Hmm.
with writing, you're writing. With illustrating, you're working from a text, trying to stay faithful or supplement that text in a way that um, enhances the text. Personally, I really like to paint and allow the painting to kind of go where it's going to go.
Hmm.
A lot of times it'll be in the last hour or so that the painting takes a turn. There's an element added that really makes it work. And I found that you can only really do that if you just let it do what it's going to do. And so that's how I prefer to work. Do a painting, let it develop, and maybe change at the last minute, and then write a story from that. And so I don't think that's really either. Um,
Yeah.
but that's how my creativity really gets triggered, as I'm in the painting process.
That
Um,
was one of the questions I was going to have for you, actually, because your book here, Tales of Hibaria, The Awakening,
uh-huh.
which is gorgeous. I know a lot of these paintings I've seen from you over the years,
Yeah.
and it had me wondering which came first, like chicken or the egg. Like, did you already have the story that went with that painting when you made the painting, or did the story come next after the painting to inspire it? Especially like the Guardians right here
Yeah.
with the sea snake going through the water and the little boat craft on top of it. Did
I would
you
say most
like how
most
did
of
that
them are
happen?
imagery. Yeah,
Yeah.
imagery first, where I will start to paint and not even really have an idea of where the painting is always going to go. And then as I'm painting, the beginnings of a story come. And really the next step, which was to write down the beginnings of a story, came about because I travel and do art shows. And I thought it'd be really cool on the tag that shows the title and the price to have, like, on the back, the beginning of the story. So I'll have like 2 or 3 lines
Mm.
that I've come up with that, for whoever's looking at the piece or decides to buy it, it kind of triggers this idea of what's going on in my mind. So I would do a painting like that one with the sea snake, the Guardians, and as I'm finishing it up, I'm thinking, what is going on here? What are the characters here? What's the situation? And and so I'll start that. I'll write it down, and sometimes that becomes the full blown story. Sometimes I go back and say that doesn't really work, and I change it. But usually that's the seed. Um, and so with this book, it was, I'd been planning to do it for years, but I really buckled down and started doing it as soon as COVID started, because all my shows canceled. And
Mm.
so I had written a lot of the stories, and it was at that point that I was like, I want these stories to reflect the painting, but that I want them to be related to one another as well. And so that took a bit more work. But yeah, it all
Hmm.
started with the imagery. I would say probably on 80% of them.
So, for Wishes of the Fish King,
Mm-hmm.
that was written by someone else, was the story already written and then you illustrated the story, or
It,
was it the
it,
other way around?
that was Doug McKelvey had written that. He'd actually written it about 18 years before, when his kids were little. And we met, and he said, I really like your style, and I think it'd be cool if you illustrated that. And this was before I had done a whole lot of illustration. I'd done my
Mhm.
own first picture book. Um, and so we sat down and did it, and it was, the manuscript was finished. It was
Mhm.
complete. Um, and that's not impossible. It's just it's a different animal. It's a different
Yeah.
process altogether. And I don't not like it. It's just the way I naturally work
Mhm.
is doing imagery first. But illustration, honestly, to answer your initial question, which do I like best? I like them all at different times, because
Yeah.
they call on different creative muscles, I guess.
Hmm.
Um,
Mhm.
and that's really exciting to change it up, mix it up, um, depending on the mood, the time of year, all that. And so, yeah, we worked on that one together. Doug and I worked on that together for about 4 or 5 months, going back and forth. I would give him sketches. He would give me his feedback. We would have a lot of conversations. I would sneak stuff in. Sometimes he caught it. Sometimes he didn't.
What did you sneak in?
There's a lot of Easter eggs in Wishes of the Fish King. My kids loved
Yeah,
finding all the Easter eggs.
we agreed to hide the crowns.
Mm-hmm.
There's some other hidden stuff that I don't even think I've told him at this point. So
There's a
you
green
just
ember. There's a green ember in it, right?
yeah, I think so. On the wall of the nursery.
In the library, yeah.
Yeah, yep.
I'll have to look
Mm-hmm.
for that.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there's some different things in there that I can't quite share all of them because that would maybe spoil it. But no, that I mean
Yeah.
that's one of the I don't really know how to say it. The with illustration, you can really get in and make it fun in a lot of different ways besides just illustrating the manuscript itself. And I really enjoy that aspect of it quite a bit.
You have a very distinctive style. When did you land there?
Well, by style, do you mean the appearance of the work?
Yeah, the way that there's like, it almost looks
Craft?
like there's layering in it, and
Mhm.
it has so much small detail, and
Mm-hmm.
the just
There's a
everything looks like textured and alive and
yeah. I
layered,
was gonna say it looks
and
very
it's just
lifelike, not
it's right, not lifelike.
whimsical, but
Yes.
full of life.
Yeah, full of
Yeah,
life, full of fantasy. Like you feel like you're there. You feel like you're peering through the trees with the person. It it really feels
sure.
like almost interactive.
I think there's a couple answers to that question. There was some intentionality and there was some lack of skill, um, which is kind of funny. And I probably shouldn't tip my hand, but I'll be honest. Like, so when I went to school for painting, I did oil painting in college, and um, I I really don't like. I work in acrylics now. I never really picked up oil, and so in that process of trying to work with oil, um, there was a lot of experimenting that didn't work because it was a medium that I wasn't very good at, and there was a lot of uh, reusing of the same canvases because I was so bad,
Mm,
um, and I didn't want to keep them. And so there was this one point where I was painting over this really dark area, and the way the paint of the top layer worked with the background created this layered, probably what you're referring to as the layered effect, that I really liked and
mhm,
hadn't created before or used before. And so that was accidental. And then coupled with that, I was trying to become really good at creating smooth gradations with acrylic, which
mhm,
without getting too technical, it dries really quick and it's really hard to do that. And so unless you mix a bunch of different paint,
Mm-hmm.
it can be a challenge. And so say for a sky, for example, if I'm trying to mix it and it doesn't create a nice gradient, it can be blotchy. And so I
mhm,
decided to embrace that and outline those blotches so that it looked intentional. And so at first it was like, I'm just going to own this or see what it does. And then I really
mhm,
liked how that turned out. And so
mhm,
I kind of embrace that now where I do these patches and either outline or kind of accentuate the differences there. And I would say for the past 12 years, that's been about consistent with what I'm doing now. Um, so I think it's a combination of so that's the style piece, but also what I'm
mhm.
trying to communicate with what I do. Um, that informs it as well. I think the world is really broken and yet
Yeah.
beautiful, and I
Mhm.
think
Mm-hmm.
how I paint, I'm trying to reflect that as well. And so there is there's like a jigsaw puzzly appearance to a lot of my images. And so that's intentional choice too, based on, I guess, what I'm trying to communicate, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, you're succeeding. I feel that. So I own some of your originals, and then I also have prints from Kickstarter. So I have a lot of the images from The Wishes of the Fish King framed. I think I have 10 pieces of your art around my house. I kind of seem a little obsessed because I am. But so having seen originals, you can tell that it's all acrylics. But when you're looking at your prints, it looks like mixed media. It looks like there's some acrylic and oils and maybe some watercolor here and there, in just because you do such an expert job at blending in a way that I don't see very often in acrylics. A lot of the picture books these days, you can tell that some of it's digital just to get the effect that they want. And it almost, like, I know that yours aren't digital, but it's like, how do you manage to get all these different effects in one single image? And especially your maps look like they have a lot of watercolor in them. Do they? Or
Well,
are your maps
yeah.
also just acrylic?
No, the maps aren't acrylic at all. They are watercolor, and then they were digitally enhanced as well. And so what is actually the painting, like the map itself that you can see, is watercolor and colored pencil. And then over that, like the texture of the parchment, I scanned and kind of laid in Photoshop. But that's the exception. The maps
Right.
and like the pencil sketches with the parchment background are the only ones that are digitally enhanced, I guess.
Yeah.
But to answer your question about the different effects, the washes or the thinly applied paint, that's just cheap paint. So you can buy, if you're familiar with painting at all, when you buy a bottle, there's like a scale usually on the back for the opacity. And so most painters want a really opaque, and that means you can't see through it, tube of paint, so that you can just put on one or two layers and you're done. But cheaper paint just has less pigment, so it's less opaque. But you'd have to layer it on unless you want it to be clear. And so I have lots of tubes for blues and greens, for example, that when applied thinly end up showing through what's behind it. And I like that. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that's part of their design,
Yeah.
but it's nice to utilize what's out there for sure.
Yeah, definitely. A few years ago, I don't remember who it was for. Was it for SD Smith? You did a prompt for kids to write stories to, and it was the boat with the big peacock head.
Yes, that was, I think, Story Worn.
Yeah, Story Worn, Sam site.
And I gave, I think that was an image I had done already, but I was talking with, man, I don't know, I think it was James Whitmer who was running it at the time. And I said, hey, I've got a bunch of images here. Will that be helpful for you guys? And I remember that particular assignment, I guess, or article. Like, there was a lot of great feedback because kids mostly, but I think some adults too, use that as a prompt to write. And that's super exciting, I think.
Yeah, that was really fun. My daughters both did it, and I think that got them really excited about their writing ability because it gave them a focused point of entry. Like, this is where we're coming into the story, and I feel like they just haven't stopped writing since. So thank you very much for participating in that project. It was really beneficial here in our home, and I think that was towards the beginning of us starting to see your work around different places. And so, how long ago was it that you wrote Ellen and the Winter Wolves, which
So
is a
that
picture
was
book?
in 2015, I think, 2014, 2015, right when I was going full time for the first time. That was, and that started with images. It started with 3 images. And then I wrote the story and filled in the remaining 20-ish. I don't remember exactly how many. So that was my first stab at a story. And I think upon reflection, it was before I had children, and reading it to my kids now, it's a doozy. It's about 20 minutes long. The older one can handle it, but it definitely didn't come from experience of reading to a kid and dealing with real life attention spans. That's for sure.
That's funny.
So would you recommend it for older kids then, or?
So what I've found with that book, I think it's format. It's landscape oriented. Its format communicates that it's for younger kids, but its content.
I don't know about that.
You don't think so?
Not here.
Picture books are for anybody. Yeah. We love picture books.
Okay.
We are firm believers that picture books that have more than 2 words per page are for everybody.
Well, this monster is about 3,000 words. So, and I had several people saying it's too big, but then some said, we appreciate your use of uncommon words. And because I don't pull back, I'm writing for me, essentially, and for little Jamin, 10-year-old Jamin. To answer your question, I think the age would be 6, 7, 8, and up.
I've heard people recently complain about how modern picture books have gotten too short. So,
well, here I am ready to, I guess, solve that problem.
This is your time. We have a literary database on our website, and we don't do reading levels. We do interest levels for recommendations because we think that so many kids are either delayed readers or advanced readers. And really, you're looking at content. Is this content something that would hold the interest of my child? And then we do sample pages so people can look at the reading level themselves and assess if their kids can read it. But we have a special tag for picture books like yours, and it's verbose picture books. So, because parents want to know, is this something that I can read to my kid in 5 to 10 minutes at bedtime, or are we going to be hanging out on the couch for a while in front of the fire with popcorn? So,
that's a great description. That's so great.
We just like to let people know what's coming. So with Tales of Hibaria, am I saying that right? Hibaria?
Hibaria.
That's
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I read it. I didn't.
You're good. You're good. I brought that on myself.
So Tales of Hibaria, The Awakening. I really enjoyed this for so many reasons. And Inara, who's 15, also read it and really enjoyed it. So it's a collection of, each chapter is a short story in the world, and there's a timeline. So you see as time is progressing, these different stories are taking place. And so I would have been nervous going into this if you had not sent us some of the short stories to beta test before you did your Kickstarter, because I typically do not enjoy short stories because I want to know more. I want the rest of the story. And that was Inara's response. She came upstairs and she's like, I finished the book. And I was like, how did you like it? And she's like, well, it was really good, but I want to know when he's going to write the rest of it, because there better be more, because this just makes me want to know the rest of the story. So I was reading it again the last couple days, and I think that what I really like is short stories. Typically for me, it's a short story and then you're done. But this is a bunch of short stories in the same time and place. And so they build on each other. It's almost like you have this aerial view and you're coming into this place and you're hearing what's happening for different people as they're moving along. But it needs more, Jamin. We need the next book.
Can I tell you how this project even started?
Yes, please do.
So I've been working on a novel for about, I would say, 7 years. And because I travel and do shows, March through October, that makes it really hard to work on a novel, because I need blocks of time, not just each day, but I need blocks of time the weekend can be in there, but if I'm gone for 5 days, man, I'm shot. And so like it takes another day to get back into, okay, where was I? What's going on with these characters?
Yeah.
And so I was getting very discouraged with the progress of the novel. And so I started to brainstorm, I want to write. How do I keep writing in a way that I can get something done and scratch the itch for this creative aspect of my life? And so I settled on the short story because they're way easier to get into and out of. When I go to a show, I come back, there's not that much to remember. And so what I started doing 2 years ago was the start of the pandemic. 4 or 5 years ago, I guess. When I would go to a show, I would have the current short story I was working on. I would make a list of things I needed to figure out that I could do while being interrupted constantly by people buying art. And then I would have that dedicated notebook, and then I would come home and kind of get all that into the story and kind of chip away at that in a more reasonable way. And so that's where the short stories came from. But I didn't want to abandon the novel. I wanted to set up the novel. And so that's essentially what I did with that. And then when the pandemic came, it allowed me to actually finish and lay out the book and do all that. And so the novel that I have been writing on and that I'm finishing up right now is the jumping off point where those stories end. And it is the beginning of the weaving together of all those stories. There are 3 characters from the short stories that are in the first.
Which characters?
What's that?
Which characters?
Well, I can't tell you that.
Well,
Can you tell us one?
I'm partway through the Tales of Hibaria.
Yeah, that's right.
And the one with the hot air balloon, it's called The Airship in the story. That one I can't get out of my mind, so I'm hoping that she's in.
She's not in the first one, man. I hate to disappoint you right away. So Hart from the River Road is in it. Hildy makes an appearance at the end, and then one other character that I'm not going to reveal at this point.
Okay,
but
keep your secrets.
But it's it's funny that you mentioned SD Smith Sam's little books that he puts out, because as I've wrestled with how to weave these stories together, it's becoming increasingly difficult in my mind to do that as novels, because I've got 3 novels planned for the whole story arc, and I know where these characters go, but they might need those mini stories interspersed.
The novellas are so powerful in telling that extra story that you want, because Sam does it, and then we are really enjoying the Skyward series from Brandon Sanderson, and he's been doing that. He's not even writing the novellas himself. I don't know if you have followed that at all. He is a ghostwriter, so he's telling her what to write, and then she's filling it in, and they're just these little short things. But he has more story to tell than that man could possibly ever get out of himself, as his last Kickstarter showed everyone. Did you see that?
I did. That was
millions.
Mind-blowing, because I saw it at the beginning. His goal seemed absurd, and then what he reached was it in the 30 millions, or it was so high.
Broke every Kickstarter record ever set, and it was so funny watching that initial video. I had Inara watch it because she's 40 chapters into her second book in her series that she's writing, and she's going. That girl is head down. I told her that I wouldn't so it took her years to write this because she kept rewriting it, which is great. I mean, she was developing, she's young still, her style was changing, her vocabulary was changing, her world building was expanding, because they're science fiction. She was realizing that she can't call money dollars in space, things like that. And so
space dollars.
As she's right, space dollars. So as she's doing all of this, she gets done with her first book, and I'm like, this is fantastic. I'm so happy for you. Yes, I will edit it for you. And it's Jamin. I am not just saying this because I'm her mother. It is good. It is a good book. This girl has the soul of a storyteller. And so I was like, I will send this to a few small publishers. Otherwise, we'll publish it ourselves. But I was like, but I'm not going to waste all of our time by shopping around a book that you are going to give up and not write the rest of the series. So you need to at least have like diligently started on your second book. So I tell her this the day she gives me the end of book 1. By the end of the week, she's done with chapter 10. She's like, I'm doing this. It's getting done. And she has ADHD. So you never know when the spark is going to go out on a special interest, you know, because she has ADHD and autism. And so it's like, is this going to stick? Is she going to get to the end of book, 3 chapters of book 2 and be like, I'm not so interested in this story. I'm going to tell a new story. So I've been just so proud of her, how she's like diligent. She's getting it done. She's like, I'm going to be done with this book and then I'm going to finish book 3. And I think she might get 2 books out of herself this year at the speed she's going. This is her like full-time summer project. She's probably writing for 4 or 5 hours a day right now.
Man, that's so great.
Just crazy. She's also getting out of a lot of chores because I feel like I can't be asking her to do chores if it's getting in the way of her art, Probably motivates her even more.
Man, that's so great that she's got A, the desire, but B, the staying power so far. That can be so hard because the difference between your initial idea and the execution, there's a lot of despair in between that. And so it seems like she's somehow sidestepping that, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So all of this to go back to, I think the idea of novellas is an excellent one to be able to tell more of your story on non-main characters or side events that are happening.
Yeah. And I feel like there are so many of those that I have lined up in my mind. I just wish I had more time. I wish I had more time to kind of commit to each and every one, because
maybe you need a ghostwriter too. Or not, because that just doesn't, it doesn't sound authentic to me.
I know. But that story that Amanda was talking about in this book, and Ara and I were talking about it last night. What did you say the title of that chapter?
Sarah Escapes the Night, the one with the balloon?
Yes. Sarah Escapes the Night. And Ara and I were talking about this on our walk last night. And we were, because I just want everyone to know, in case you struggle with this, I don't like doing anything, especially with ADHD. Everything feels like a priority. And so self-care does not necessarily feel like the most pressing matter. And so I made a deal with my therapist that I was going to try to go to bed earlier, and I was going to start taking a walk every day for my stupid mental health. And so I have taken a walk 8 days in a row now, you guys. That is some staying power. I just want to say. So we were on our walk last night, and we go at night because I can't handle bad weather, like humidity in Iowa is soul sucking. So we go after dark, right before the last of the lower level crew go to bed. So we get to have these great conversations though, right? Like we get to recap the day and all of this, 'cause we're not really the eat around the table sort of family. So this is our table time, is we just all go and have this walk and talk. So Inar and I were talking about that story, and we were specifically having the conversation about the fact that a book and a story has 3 different relationships. It has the relationship to itself and the rest of the book, and then it has the relationship to the author and what the author's intent was, and then it has the relationship to the reader and the reader's interpretation. And the author has brought their life experiences and their worldviews and all of that into it, and then the reader is bringing their life experience and their worldviews and their ideas into the story. And so we were talking about that story and how it really feels like this beautiful representation of depression to me. because she's in the light. She's having a great day. She just got done with the sale. She's been successful. She's bringing her success home to her family. And then the darkness rolls in and there's no escaping it. There's no warning. And it just, it comes and it rolls over her. And I could see it rolling over her because I had this beautiful experience at Lake Michigan. My sister used to have a lake house. And so we were there and we'd pulled into the driveway and I went straight back to the deck. And I'm like, I think there's fog rolling in, you guys, like way across Lake Michigan. And they're all like, no, no. And they all go inside, losers. So they completely miss the experience of the fog rolling in. And as landlubbers, like we don't get to see and experience that the way people on lakes or on the coast do, but it's incredible. And it just like, it's scary almost. It just comes and there's darkness. Like you cannot see the water anymore. You cannot see Chicago's lights anymore. You can't see boats, nothing. It's like if you are on the water, you're stuck there unless you can find your way home somehow because you're in darkness. And so I felt that as she's covered in this darkness and she's despairing. And then there's just this tiny touch of light in that firefly. But that's all she needs. That's all she needs to hold on to. And I loved how you talk about like how you describe the focus that she has and the strength that it's taking to like lift her, you know, to pull the ropes, to lift the ship up and down as she's trusting this little light. And so often when you're in a depression, you're trusting that little light of knowledge that it will get better. Even though it doesn't feel like it's better, even though everything in you is telling you this is only getting worse, this is never going to end. Often if you have that little touch of hope that says it got better before, or, you know, nobody else is dying from this experience. So clearly my oh, what is it, like on the airplane, all of your things are reading wrong. Oh, what is that? Yeah, thank you. My instruments are lying to me as to what's up and what's down right here. And I'm just trusting that I'm going to come out on the other side of this. But she just like follows this little piece of light and she gets through it and it rolls away and she's able to just like go. And that's, and I was like, are you saying you think that's what he was writing? I was like, no, I seriously doubt that's what he was writing. But that's what I was feeling when I was reading it.
And I was feeling too. I mean, I wouldn't really say depression. I was just thinking hardships or whatever. But that's kind of where I was going too in my mind. So where were you going in your mind, Jamin?
No, that's a really great and interesting question because it shows I end up having the best conversations with therapists. Like this has happened 5 or 6 times where they either look at the art or, you know, they've read the books and we end up talking. And that's not specifically the direction I was coming from, but I think in an untrained, maybe more intuitive way, that's something I'm very interested in. Like I'm very interested in not specifically depression, but the inner life, you know, like what I write about. Oftentimes I'm reflecting on what happened in that situation as a kid. I'm thinking about a memory, or I think about maybe even not myself, but I look at my own kids and I'm guessing as to what's going on with them. And it's always been a fascinating world. The interior life, how we think, how we perceive, how we respond. And I've just always been drawn to that. And so I want to write about that and not just write about it, but write about it in an honest way, because I think as a kid and even as an adult, I've always really pushed back and been almost resentful towards really pat answers or really empty kind of comforting answers. Everything's going to be okay, or everything happens for a reason, or whatever form that takes, which I think often is presented as, I don't know what else to say and I want to comfort you, I don't want to scare you. And so the motive, I think, is maybe fine, but I was never satisfied with that. And so to delve into those questions now that I'm an adult, I think has given me an opportunity to not really answer those questions, because I mean, that's the problem. You can't just package an answer and say, well, I did it. but to address
Right.
that in a way that's honest and in a way that I feel like reflects maybe not everyone's experience, but reality
Mm-hmm.
as I think it is. And so, yeah, with that one, I forget. Is that the one where she remembers going to sleep next to a tree?
Mm-mm.
Um, Story.
No.
Maybe that's a different story, but in the different stories, I pull memories into it and then try to compare it to um, experiences that they've had as they self kind of analyze,
Mm-hmm.
as they're just trying to make sense of it without it being, as I said earlier, pat or really canned or packaged. And so you strike a line that, I mean, you're really walking a tightrope because you don't want to just say, well, who knows?
Mm-hmm.
There's no conclusion here. But you don't want to put a bow on it either. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to strike a balance, or I attempted to in those stories. I think about that one. I think about the one with the River Road, where the boy is his family dies, and he goes into the wood to grieve, essentially. And
Mm-hmm.
there's no easy answer for grief. There's no easy answer for
Mm-hmm.
this is how you handle something monstrous like this.
Yeah.
And so acknowledging we shouldn't keep away from that because it's a difficult thing to talk about. Like, heck no. I mean, that we should engage in that,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's slightly dissatisfying in
Yeah.
how we conclude. And so I guess I don't know if that really answers your question, but that's what I'm trying to wrestle with a lot of those
Yeah.
stories.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. What you said about how when people say those things like, everything happens for a reason and that
Mhm.
they're well-meaning. I used to believe that.
Mm,
And the more well-meaning people that I have come
mm,
across, the less I think that they're actually well-meaning and the more I think they're selfish. Because I
mm,
think that when people say things like that, it's really armor to not have to feel your feelings. Like
mm,
they are
Yeah.
protecting themselves from the level of emotion that you are going through. And so they're just giving some trite response to have said something to look like they were engaging with you, but not actually engaging with you. If we look at Jesus for the example, he never gave trite responses. Bible says Jesus wept. Like he even
right.
knew their grief was going to turn to rejoicing when their brother came back to life, but he sat with them and wept. He met them where they were at in their suffering. And so I think that that's what we really need to do is meet people in their suffering, in their grief, in their trauma, even if it's just sitting with them, even if it's just
Mhm,
crying with them and just supporting them in that way. And I felt that I saw a lot of that happening in these stories in how many of the
mhm,
children never went alone, that they had a
mhm,
sibling who came alongside them and went with them, even against their own personal,
mhm.
their personal desires or their own
Right.
fears. They stood up and faced those in order to not send the other person alone. And in the story with the little boy who doesn't speak, the orphan who doesn't
Yeah.
speak, and
Yeah. Yeah.
he goes into the tower with the little girl who has gone with him, even though she thinks his mission is a failure, even though she thinks the tower will consume both of them. And then within the tower, once she realizes what has gone wrong for the other children who've gone before, she stays with
Mhm,
him so that when it goes wrong, it will go wrong for them together.
mhm,
And I just I and and she thinks he's there for selfish reasons. She thinks he's there to get
mhm,
his voice back, yet she
mhm,
still is walking alongside him. And I think that that's what we're called to, is to walk alongside each other and to
mhm,
not leave each other to our despair or to our suffering alone. And
mhm,
so I loved all of the positive sibling relationships and the positive friendships where people just have that loyalty and people do hard things when they have to take the star out of the lighthouse and go into the darkness. And I really liked that imagery as well of the constellations changing and how that
mhm,
makes everyone lose their bearings. And it's true. And I
mhm,
feel like the world around us, especially through COVID and while you were writing this and everything, the world felt like it was losing its bearings, and up wasn't up, and things that we could trust before we couldn't trust anymore, and things of that nature. And so I really like that. But I would like for you to talk about your shooting stars, because that is something that you put in your art that I absolutely love.
Oh, man. The ones that are shooting up or down? Because I've got
Yes,
both.
your shooting up ones, the ones that you have shooting up.
Um, man, I'm trying to remember the poem. It's not even a poem. It's like a couplet, maybe. If stars falling down mean the end of all things, then stars falling up mark the start.
Yeah.
So that was a couple lines that I wrote. Um, I don't even remember. This was about 15 or 20 years ago. It might have been for someone's wedding, and I did a little drawing, a little doodle for them for their wedding. And I guess what that means, to me, we think of falling stars as one of the symbols or somewhat symbolic of the end of the world or end of things. And so I just turned it on its head. And
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know, stars, as you know, just from the stories, are interesting and fascinating and very symbolic in ways I don't even know. That I think their
Mm-hmm.
vastness, not physically, but in their meaning, is just such a
Mm-hmm.
draw to me, because kind of like a gem, every time you turn it, there's, oh yeah, it could mean that too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it touches on that. I think it touches on this idea that there are things that so many people view in a certain way that, when viewed in a different way, can have a completely different meaning, or the not even a different or opposite meaning, but whatever the richer word of opposite is, the
Yeah.
unmeaning, right? Instead of end of
Mm-hmm.
everything, the beginning of something. Um, yeah, I think that's going to be my answer to that. Even if it doesn't always have direct meaning in that painting, that I do,
Mm-hmm.
I want to put. I mean, I do so much for me. I put it in there for me. Even if
Mm-hmm.
the person who buys it doesn't necessarily know that. I do it for me, because half the time when I'm painting, I think it's probably therapy.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot.
So is that why the constellations play such a theme in the Tales of Hibaria?
I I think so. I think, yeah, that mystery, again. I think dealing with not wanting to write things with pat answers or really easy answers. I think I probably think about those characters in that same way too. There's many of them. It's not. I'm not writing allegory. They are not
Mm-hmm.
God. They're not perfect,
Yeah.
but
Right.
I do. Which probably gets me in trouble with some people because they want that. But I mean, they do in some ways represent, wisdom and
Mm-hmm.
aid,
Mm-hmm.
obviously. Um, and I think the mystery that those things are often wrapped in, the stars provide that, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
They- they're really a good medium for kind of dealing with those kinds of topics, I guess. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
How long ago did you start the world building for Hibaria?
Wow, that is a hard question, because, like your daughter rewriting her book over and over,
Mm-hmm.
honestly, I think 1.0 was in 2004.
Mm-hmm.
I 2004, I was still in school, in college. I did a show with my buddy. He did watercolor and drawings, and I did acrylic paintings. And what we decided to do was, I would create a bunch of imagery, and he would do some drawings, but then he would do some journal entries. And the idea was that this guy was stuck on this island, and we would create a loose framework that viewers of the show could come in and either kind of come to their own conclusions from, or just the beginning of a story that would kind of stir the imagination. And from that, I wrote a novel that was very bad. But it was really the first foray into this world. It wasn't called Hibaria at the time, but so much has been lifted from that I think it's probably right to say that was the beginning of it. So, man, what is that? 18 years ago, 18-ish years ago now. So started a long time ago.
I like it.
Man, my head is so full and has been so full of these things for about half of my life. It's good to finally get some stuff down on paper, because it's felt very crowded up there.
So
I can imagine.
Is it like a relief? There's more space in your head once you get some of it down?
I think so. I think that's where the map came from. I had vague ideas, but I was having a really slow show in Denver one year. And I got out this paper and I said, I'm going to build this map so I can know where all these paintings go. And so I did that. And suddenly I just felt so much more calm and so much less cluttered. And so, it's an organizing technique. I didn't even know it would be, but that kind of happened. So now when I started painting, I kind of look at the map. It's right next to my desk. And I say, okay, this is probably where that goes. And for whatever reason, that just helps a lot. I don't understand how I work. I know how to get around.
It almost sounds like it's a form of like creativity anxiety, where you're carrying all this stuff and it creates this like nervous energy and it stresses you out, and you don't even realize how much it's stressing you out until you get it out of yourself. And then you're like, oh, what a relief. I didn't even know that was bothering me, but now it's done.
I think it's a combination of that, but also just knowing what to do with it. Because if I have all these unrelated stories in my mind and no hope of ever getting them down, it feels like potentially just a loss, like an enormous loss. And so even though I don't foresee that I will get them all down, maybe I will, but every time I paint, I come up with another one. So I doubt it. The fact that I've kind of begun a system or have this map that I can plug things into, and I have begun to actually write the stories that go with them. It's like a release valve for the pressure of this has to go somewhere. Yeah.
So it's along with writing your own books and then illustrating new books like The Wishes of the Fish King, you also have undertaken doing jacket art and interior illustrations, I believe, for reprints of books, since sometimes when books are reprinted, you have the author rights, but not the illustrator rights. So I know that you did the cover, which is gorgeous, for My Uncle the Avion for Purple House Press. Had you read that book before?
I hadn't, but I was talking to Jill. I believe it's Jill,
who
runs Purple House, and she sent me the manuscript. And I had taken French in elementary school. I was in England at the time, where they start language when you're 7 or 8. So anyway, I took French as a kid. And so it was great because it was pulling all that back. And so I was reading through it, having a great time. It didn't even feel like an assignment. And so that was the first time I had read it. And then we had some conversations about the cover, which it's a different, so illustration as opposed to doing my own thing. Both the writing and the painting is different and really fun. It's a different muscle. And so I gathered a bunch of things that I wanted to communicate that I didn't know whether they were important to her, but I thought these are cool things that we can incorporate into the cover. What do you think about that? And it was a great, and it usually is when I do work with publishers. I think there's a great back and forth, or there can be, if my ideas are any good. of, oh yeah, doing it that way actually covers this, even if a lot of people don't pick it up, but if they do,
Mm-hmm.
That's possible. And so I love doing that. I love sitting down and saying, okay, what do we want to communicate here besides an image from the book? Which obviously, man, one of my pet peeves growing up is when the image doesn't even appear in the book, or
Right.
is inaccurate in really obvious ways. um, and so
Yeah.
that was exciting, just to say, okay, this is going to be accurate to the book. And then also if I can incorporate some other elements too, that would be great. And so I really like that process as well. And it's exciting to do. And it's exciting when the person you're working with is as excited about it as you are. So yeah, that's been a fun
Yeah.
process too.
Is that the only one you've done, or have you done another
I have
one?
done, I think I think I've done 4 or 5. One
Okay.
for Purple House Press, one for a traditional publisher, a couple for the Rabbit Room. Although the ones from the Rabbit Room you wouldn't recognize because they're pen and ink. Which
So which ones did you do for the Rabbit Room?
So they had a couple Walt Wangerin books come out maybe
Mm-hmm.
8 or 9 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Books on writing. One was on writing, and one was, I think, a memoir. And the problem of one of my problems with being creative is that I had to focus on painting, but they
Mm-hmm.
wanted pen and ink, and I'm like, well, man, I used to do that, and I would love to do that, and I still can. I think here I did this, and they're like, oh yeah, that would work. I wish I could do so many other things, but I just got to focus on the painting. But it worked for those, and so I did a couple of those, and then I did a traditional painting for, I think, Bethany House, one of their books that they put out. Um,
Nice.
but I think with the stuff that I've started working on with my own, I'm not like turning those down, but I'm not going out to seek them either. And so
Yeah.
I feel like I've got my own work lined up to the
Mm-hmm.
degree where, man, I just got to get this done. Every
Yeah.
year goes by, and I'm like, you didn't get done everything on your list that you wanted to get done. We make that happen this year, so that's kind of where I'm at with that.
Yeah.
How did
Yeah.
you transition to being a professional artist, like full time?
Wow, that's a question. As in, how did I decide to, or what did that look like, money wise? Like how does one actually make a living? Because there's a lot of different ways to ask that question, I think.
I don't know. I mean, how did you always want to be a professional artist? And then was there, I'm assuming there was a time when you couldn't do that full time and then you were able to transition
Yeah,
to doing that full time?
that's a great question. I always did. When I was little, I wanted to be an artist, but I thought that meant owning an art store.
No.
I had very little understanding of what that meant. And I didn't really grow up around anyone who
hmm
knew how to do that, or so it was very um, out there. Maybe other people did
Yeah.
that, and so it was, in some ways it was a dream, but it was unattainable. So not to the degree that I didn't go to school for painting. Man, I was a wreck as a kid. Like, I'm going to pursue art, but then not actually pursue art. I mean, that's essentially what I did. I pursued art, but then I was like, well, I can't actually make a living with this, so I'm going to do something else. And so I was working at Barnes and Noble for a while, trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I'm a very fearful person. And so the art mystery, not really knowing anyone in that field and not really knowing how to get into it just terrified me. So I was like, well, I guess I'll just never do that and just wish I did. I ended up becoming a pastor, at the church I still go to, a college pastor, where I was doing sermons every week, running a ministry with 8 or 10 small groups. Uh, Really something, and I had a little bit of seminary, but and that was very important in my development. It was the right thing to do at that time. I was kind of in that world at my church, and it made sense to a lot of people to kind of step into that role. But at the same time, it was very uncomfortable. And so, but I said, I'm going to do this, and I'm not going to just quit. And so I did it for 6 years. And in that time, I was also wrestling with the validity of art as an occupation, because it felt fun. It felt, yeah, right.
You can't do things that are fun for a living.
No,
right. I
not
mean,
at all.
I think there is a strain within, at least within a lot of the churches that I've gone to, that work isn't something necessarily to be enjoyed. If you happen to, it's okay, but really you need to be providing and maybe doing something that is really important stuff. And so being a pastor was great, because like that was important, and no one was going to argue that was important. But within this time, I'm still really wrestling with, it's when I go home and paint at night that I'm really feeling alive, right? It's when I go home and think about stories that I'm really, really excited, and I don't know what to do with that tension, right? So for several years, I was just wrestling with, is this wrong to want to pursue art? Is it selfish? Is there something inherently self-serving in it? And if it is, even if I like it, I'm not going to do it, because I want to do the right thing. And so I think it was, I read Os Guinness's The Call. He's like an Irish guy who talks about, I don't even remember, but I remember after I read the book, it was, there are really valid vocations like all over, and it's not just Christian work or whatever that is valid. And so there was the validity piece of it, but there was also the fear piece of, okay, if it's valid, that's still a huge risk. And so I think I was having to grapple with both of those things. And fortunately, both of those things were on a very similar trajectory, where as I was figuring out, no, this is not just valid, it's kind of almost wrong to not pursue this, because this is how I'm made. This is how I've been equipped. And in some ways, I feel like it would be a waste to not. I think along with that was, which was ironically addressed by being a pastor. Like, I'm terrified of speaking in public. And I had to do that every week. It was the worst. The first year doing that was the worst year of my life. I wanted to throw up before every time I got up. And so talk about terrible. But I learned to deal with fear. And I think for me, what was behind that fear, like, you just can't do this, and realizing, okay, this is possible. You can do it. As I was figuring out that doing art is valid, I was also figuring out that fear doesn't have to be surrendered to. And so it was really great that those were tracking together. And then this guy came along who was perfect for my job. And I talked to the head pastor, which I was a little nervous about, because they had been paying for my seminary and kind of investing in me. And they're like, oh, that's great. That this guy is the perfect guy. And that's great that you are pursuing what we think is really great. And your skill set. And so I have a great relationship with my church still, unexpectedly, I think, through that whole transition. And so, I think it was back in 2014 that I made the switch. The nuts and bolts of it were the shows. I had a friend who was in a similar position. We had met in art school, and he had gone full time about 6 months before me. And he said, we can kind of make a living doing these shows. And man, I'm glad that I didn't know anything when I made that decision, because I would not have made that decision at the time. But I was just like, okay, we're going to do shows. We're going to travel around, sell art. And and it's going to work. And it kind of did, but then like I was in it. And so, I found other ways to bring in income, whether it's through licensing or speaking or, illustration work. And so, and going to the Rabbit Room, that was the first year I went to Hutchmoot, which is their annual conference. And I met a bunch of other artists who became really good friends. And then, I mean, resources too. I don't want to say it crassly, like I just view them as a resource, but like they're friends
connections.
Connections who know kind of what they're doing. And so it was just, I don't even know how it happened. I tell you the story, but like, as I tell it, it sounds absurd. It sounds like really, but that's kind of how it happened. And I'm so grateful that that's kind of how it transpired, for sure.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So I have another question that's kind of unrelated.
Sure.
I see that you sell originals. Do you ever get in trouble with your wife for selling paintings that she really likes, or do you make sure she has first dibs?
Well, I think the biggest trouble was when I was painting stuff for our house before I was doing this full time, because the intent of the painting was to go on our wall. But then when I went full time, I didn't have this giant backlog of work. So as I'm like lifting it off the wall, that's where it's like, wait, what? I'm like, hey, we got to make money. So that was the one point of tension, I think, right at the beginning. And that was painful for me too, because I had painted it with the intent that it would be with us. But since then, she's got a great attitude. She's like, oh, you can paint another one. Like, I'm glad you have the confidence in my creative ability to continually come up with new stuff, because sometimes I worry that I'm out of gas and I'm never going to come up with anything again. But no, she's great. And a lot of times I will, now that I make prints and stuff, like I'll hang prints on the wall, and so those don't have to leave, and she gets to look at them. And now it's the kids that get really distressed when stuff moves. They're like, where did that one go? I'm like, had to sell it. Sorry.
You have a coffee table that I saw pictures of that was pretty cool.
When we got married, my wife brought a glass covered coffee table to our marriage. 3 glass panels that were approximately 20 by 10 that we discussed several times that we should replace before we had kids, because they would inevitably get broken. And we didn't, because stuff came up. And then I think it was this year, Amber, that my 4-year-old just jumped through one of them. He was jumping on the couch and put his elbow through one, shattered it, and got really mad when he got in trouble because he didn't understand what was going on. So then the idea all along had been to paint some kind of imagery to go in the place of the panels. And so I said, well, I guess it's time. So I did some stained glass kind of imagery to put in there. We still have 2 glass panels, which is foolish because I don't learn, but I just don't have time to do the other 2 at this point until I'm forced to. So yeah, so we have the stained glass one in the middle.
It's really pretty.
I do a lot of different things, for sure.
Yeah. Jack of all trades in the art world.
Exactly.
So I have a suggestion for the Tales of Hibaria. So there's 12 constellations, and there's 12 months in a year.
Oh, the calendar, right?
Clearly, there should be a calendar. Like, why there is not already a calendar is beyond me.
You want to know why? Because every November, I'm like, I didn't do it, and that's pretty much it. I'm like, okay, next year, and then it's suddenly November again, and so there's no like principled reason as to why I haven't done it. It's mostly complete forgetfulness and terrible business management, pretty much.
Well, I guess this is your reminder.
Maybe this is the year. Yep, it's the end of July.
This
Let's
be
get
the
going.
time that I need to have it, right? Okay, we'll see what I can do.
Well, do you have any words of encouragement for kids or people that are wanting to be creative and feeling any fear about it?
Oh man. Well, absolutely. I think, I run into this. This makes me sad. When I'm at shows, I oftentimes run into kids who their parents say, "Look, this guy does art just like you do art," and I think they're trying to encourage their kids, obviously. And I think more often than not, the kid gets really sad, and they're like, "Well, I'm not that good." Um, I'm like, man, uh, neither was I. And so a lot of times I'll have on my phone drawings from when I was a kid. And I'm like, look what I was doing. Um, I wasn't very good. And so if there's not just a kid, but anyone who's in that place where they love to create, whether it's art or writing or music or whatever, just doing it over and over and over again. I mean, if that gives you life, don't care that it's not good. Don't care that it's not as good as a professional or your older brother or whatever. Just do it. And if that's where it ends, that's where it ends. That's great. Do it. But if you want to do it, if you want to make a career out of it, there is a way to do that. And so like, just keep after it. Just keep after it and find people who know what that next step is. And so, which can be hard, right? I said I knew no one as a kid growing up. And I know there's a lot of kids in that situation. With the world as it is today, with online stuff, I think there's just so many more avenues to reach out and to connect to those people. And I know a lot of people who are in my position who are responsive and who, because of our own experiences, are really happy to share advice, share feedback. And so, yeah, I will do that. I will talk to your kid. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but I think I will. If they really have genuine questions, like if suddenly there's like 50, I don't know if I can get to them all, but like, no, really, to be honest, like I would love to help point a kid towards what a next step would be. And so, yeah, I would just say keep after it, and don't discount the slow process that life demands. That's everything, and art is included.
Yeah.
None of us are born gifted. We have to keep after it. So,
Well,
I think that's what I would say.
art.
Well, yeah. We need. Oh man, art. We need good art. We just need good art.
Yeah.
And so I guess I would say that too. Like, don't think it's less valid because it's not math. Don't think it's less valid because it's not engineering. Those things are great, and we definitely we know that we need those. I think we don't know as much that we need art, but I'm hoping that we will, as time goes on, that we would see that art is as vital as those things. So
yeah, it was fun last night. My husband is one of those math loving engineers, really math loving engineers, and not artistic at all. But
false. He doesn't draw, but Matt sews all of these like Disney dresses, princess dresses for his daughters and costumes and all this because he was a show choir kid. But
wow, okay,
so there's different types of art. He doesn't draw.
As far as drawing, painting, whatever. But even he last night, he was looking at our copy of Wishes of Vish King, and even he last night was like coming alive, looking at the illustrations. So we all need art, and even if you are mathy and can't draw,
absolutely.
Yeah, I can barely do hangman. Like that's my level of being able to draw, and even that, it's like these body parts aren't really lined up where they go. Whereas my mom, her gifting is copying. She can look at something and copy it. So she'll like sit in church and she'll have a little like Hallmark card that has this like beautiful little mouse climbing a stalk of grain. And by the end of the service, she has like a photocopy replica that she's made. And then my Aunt Gloris is she's an artist and an illustrator, and she's been doing a lot of work for Anthony at Living Book Press. And she, oh my goodness, some people are just like overly talented and gifted, and it just seems unfair to the rest of us. So my whole childhood, my aunt could draw anything she could see. She kept the most faithful daily journals where she would write funny quotes about the kids, draw something out of the day that, you know, like she would just sit there and like draw somebody reading a book across the room. Or she has these pictures that she's drawn of me reading to my kids, and my kids have like 5 legs because every time they change position, she would like just keep adding to the drawing. And so it's like me reading to my spider children, but she could draw anything she could see. And then, but she couldn't draw what she could think at all. So like 4 or 5 years ago, she started training her left hand to draw.
No.
Because she's right-handed. So she can draw what she can think with her left hand and can draw what she can see with her right. And I'm like, I'm out. I'm out.
I'm much for one person. Yeah.
I know. I know. It's so unfair. But yeah, so and then my grandma painted other people's paintings. Like I have a Van Gogh in my house that is by my grandma. And so I was surrounded by all of this beautiful artwork growing up. And then Gemma, my second daughter, she has just been an artist. She's a perfectionist. She's on the spectrum. And she refused to draw when she was little. She wouldn't even color because it wasn't going to look like what she wanted it to look like. And so she would come and make you draw it. Like I said, like my elephant looks more like a cat and this sparrow combined or something. But she just sat and waited. And the thing with like these spectrumy perfectionists is they won't do something until they know they can do it well. So I don't know how magically one day she woke up and could draw finally, but she could. Like the synapses had connected and she woke up and she just started drawing, and she would fill a page from one side to the other with all this tiny detail and all this like little background stuff going on. And she's just this like incredible artist, and her grandparents got her art lessons with a local artist one year for Christmas, and she went in, and the teacher's like, okay, our warm-up exercise is we're going to think of, you know, something that we want to just draw today. What's something that you want to just sketch out for your warm-up exercise? So Gemma, being just like nervous, she's in a social situation without anybody else to be her like moral support people. And so she just like nervously says the first thing she thinks of, and she's like, a rainbow farting unicorn. And the teacher's like, all right, sounds good. It turned out this was going to be her entire project for like the entirety of the class. So it's this mixed media class, and every week they like add a new layer. So we have this like gorgeous painting mixed media thing of a rainbow farting unicorn.
That's
just
amazing.
like classic. So yeah, so I'm surrounded by all of this art, but my thing is reading. Like I love to read. I love the emotion and connecting with the emotion in the book. And I had a not peaceful childhood, and so books were my escape. And I read, somebody shared in our Facebook group this week whole like string of tweets that people had shared about what the library was to them when they were a kid, or from librarians. And one of them that really struck me was they said that the library is a place that kids can go to see what a normal family looks like and what a healthy family looks like. And I feel like that's what books were for me, because I could go and I could read a lot. I had a very, very high reading words per minute average. And so I would just like devour hundreds of books throughout the year. And I was seeing what healthy looked like. And as an undiagnosed autistic kid who just couldn't figure out why the world did not make sense to me naturally the way it seemed to make to everyone else, I was able to study people, and especially people who were writing satire, like Jane Austen. Like, she's making fun of like all these societal things. And I loved that because I was like, it really is that crazy. And she sees it too, you know? So, but she writes about like why people are doing these things and what their motivations are and what social constraints people have on them that may make them act a way that isn't natural. And so then it was okay for me to realize I have to act this way that isn't natural for the sake of the social constraint, but I can still be myself and I like be secure in who I feel I am and what is important to me and what isn't important to me outside of these social constraints. And I can even like push and bump against the social constraints a little bit. Like the Bennett sisters all went into society at the same time. Like you can make decisions that are a little bit anti-conventional and the world won't end, even if you have a couple judgy voices over here that just don't shut up. So I just loved reading, and I really appreciate all the authors today that are continuing to put good, solid stories out there that can shine a light in the darkness, that can show where the path is and help lead people through hard situations. And my special interest is books that focus on emotional intelligence and helping kids know, like, what is a healthy way to process through these emotions? What do these emotions even look and feel like? Because if you don't know what they look and feel like, they can be very panic inducing when you feel them and you're like, I don't know what's going on here. So I really, really appreciate the Tales of Hibaria, and I'm very much looking forward to the novel. So
thank you.
This is always my thing with living authors, so don't die on me.
I know. I mean, I wasn't thinking about it, but I will definitely added reason
Sam's
not to.
books, like the Green Ember books, are I kid you not, the first time in like 20 years that I was willing to start a series that wasn't done already.
He was churning them out
because of my kids. Yeah.
I'm like, come on, man. He's just so discouraging to me because he can like he's just like knocking them out like 1 or 2 a year. I'm just like, Sam, come on. Yeah. I'll try not to die.
Overachievers. He wasn't illustrating them though, so
that's
you know,
that's true.
It's not like an all-around athlete.
And that's what I have to figure out for this novel. So like the novel like is going to be black and white. It's going to be printed here in the US, and so that does leave a challenge. I want to do some line art. It's not going to be illustration heavy, but to pull out all illustrations seems not to be the greatest move either. Unfair, yeah. I just need to I have to figure out how I'm actually going to approach that.
I know color plates are
so
really expensive.
So hard to do. Yeah.
So, all right. Well, thank you so much, Jamin. This was really enjoyable hearing all of this. And thank you for sharing your story with us. So in the show notes, we will be including a link to your website where people can buy prints, buy your book, and I believe your show dates are also on there if people want to hit up an art show in their locale.
I think there's two left, whether it's going to be in
left this year?
Denver. Well, and by the time this comes out, I'll probably be done because it's probably not going to come out right
but
away.
Next year, like I always look at it, and every year I'm like, I'm going to get to Des Moines this year. So one of these years it'll happen. I swear, like we don't have many family events during the year since my grandparents passed and my aunt and uncle moved away. But like every year, your Des Moines show is on like some family event.
You were having a child last time.
I had a baby. Yes, when I had Lily. It just keeps being a bad weekend. I just might fly to Denver one of these times and just be like, I'm going to a show. So, all right. So we'll add a link to your website so that people can see all your illustrations and what you have going on. And you also host a podcast with Kira, and you guys host that through the Rabbit Room and talk about art and talk with other artists. If that's something people want to listen to, we'll have a link to that as well. And any of the books that we mentioned will be in the show notes. And if you guys want to click stars on the episode or leave a comment or a question for Jamin, we can pass it on and maybe he'll come back and answer some questions for us. That would be great. And remember that the stories are truer than true. And if you haven't had a walk yet today, you should go have one. Talk to you later.